everybody. Thank you for coming to our first Black Lives Matter Community Forum. We are so happy that you're here with us today. I'll tell you, we are so glad that our own Reverend James P. Quincy has written such an amazing book about how all lives matter. And today we want to let you know that you also are able to join the conversation. The last half an hour, we actually are going to be taking some of your questions that you've written down on the cardboard pieces in the back. Now, what I want to do is to introduce to you the man who sparked this entire conversation, Reverend Quincy. He is someone who is passionate, who has history behind Black lives and knowing that they matter, because he instills that into all of us at Lee Road Baptist Church. We thank you so much for joining us here today, and without any further ado, I'm going to welcome to the stage Reverend Quincy.
What an amazing welcome and introduction. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Now, you know, you really don't have to sit so far back. We promise we don't bite. We promise we're not going to attack or reach out. But so feel free to move up some. I do wanted to give a couple of words of opening. Last year, in the midst of protests for Tamir Rice and Michael Brown and Eric Garner, I struggled with the response to this crisis in our community. The result was I began to pen an emergency response. That emergency response is what you have seen as Black Lives Matter today. The book meanders through my work with young people and how our response has to be far more active and far less reactive. Felicia Snoops Pearson. Anyone familiar with Felicia Snoops Pearson? Anyone watch The Wire?
Yeah.
Felicia Snoops Pearson is an assassin in The Wire. And they say Stephen King says she is the most vicious assassin that ever hit at network television. Felicia Snoops Pearson was convicted of murder herself at the age of 14. And she says that what happened is she met the individuals from The Wire. They wrote her part in, which is why on the show her name is Felicia Parsons. Well, she was questioned by CNN, and so they asked her, how did she get in trouble? She was on to talk about the situation that happened in Baltimore now. But of course, you know, they started saying, well, what about you? How did you get into the stuff that you were in? And she was really forthright in responding. I probably would have said, this is not what we came to talk about. But she said to them something along these lines. She says, I was adopted. She says, and I felt that no one cared about me. The fact that my mother and father would drop me off and never come back to get me. And she said, in essence, she felt like her life didn't matter. And so she said, what she was very clear about, my situation was my situation, and it came out of the fact that I felt that my life didn't matter. And so we may sell some books tonight, but we're here today. We have come out tonight really to engage in a conversation. The conversation that we want to have is with members of our community to ensure that lives matter before those lives are taken. Rather than to wait until, and if you read the book, there's some things in there that talks about rather than waiting for our young people to be killed, and then we talk about their lives, we plant them on a t-shirt. You know, we need to be doing some of that stuff while they're celebrating, while they're here to be celebrated, and they can actually see and enjoy the fact that someone cares about them and celebrates them. So I asked a few of our community leaders to join us as we broaden this conversation, and I want to say thank you to all of them. At this point, I'll start off with our councilman, Terrell Pruitt, who has been, for me, a rock in my welcome and my journey in the city of Cleveland. He has exposed me to a lot that the city has to offer and has filled me in on many of the particulars specifically of our community and specifically here in the Lehigh Harvard section. So I asked Councilman Pruitt to come to aid us in our discussion of how policy can impact the concept that Black Lives Matter. And so we'll be talking about some of that. I also invited our commander, Deon McCauley, who is the leader of the 4th District Police Command here in Cleveland. I asked Commander McCauley to help us and join in our conversation as we discuss the impact that the makeup of the police department has in terms of enhancing the fact that Black Lives Matter. And then I asked our community advocate, Elaine Goldstein, who is the president and CEO of the Harvard Community Service Center, everyone in Lee Harvard area knows Mrs. Goldstein. And she's a great help to our community. But I asked Ms. Goldstein to come to assist us in our discussion as we talk about how we engage families and in our community to make the point that Black Lives Matter. And then we have Brother Armand Brown, who is a member of Negro Baptist Church and lives right here in the Ward 1 community. He's joining us representing a younger voice of our community and sharing the concept of Black Lives Matter. I could say more about Armand's story, but at some point maybe he'll share that with you. I don't know how much he wants to talk about today. But the fact that where he was headed is not where he is headed, because at some point he realized that his life matters. And I think that's what we have to do for our young people. So first of all, would you please join me in welcoming our great esteemed panel. And I thank all of you all for coming out tonight to be with us and to share with us. So I'm going to turn it back over to the powerful, the exciting, the enthusiastic Mrs. Erica Barron. All right.
Well, we're going to jump right in. For those of you who have the book, you know that there are 6 inspiring, amazing chapters that really can get our conversation started. So the first topic that we want to discuss with our wonderful panelists is how can we inspire Black lives? So I'm going to start with our councilman and ask, what do you think that we can do to improve the inspiration in our Black youth?
Well, thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think when you talk about a community, and especially a community like ours that has a long history, some things are very simple when you want to inspire Black life. It doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to do something extravagant as a celebration or a parade. Sometimes it's very simple as just speaking to young folks. Mm-hmm. Now, especially as our community ages, and you have a disconnect between the young people that are on your street or in the shopping center or in places you go. It's often some people are afraid to make eye contact, to say hello, to speak. But just little things like that. Now, you may be afraid not of the individual, you also may be afraid of the type of response. But what I've always found is whenever you speak to someone, it often breaks them down. It allows them to know that, listen, it's not only do I respect you enough to acknowledge your presence, but also I care about you, and I purport some sense of belonging, that you and me belong in the same community, and just little stuff like that. Getting to know the kids on your street. Now sometimes they don't always operate and act the way we approve of, but at least knowing who they are. At least being able to identify them in a manner that is not in a negative way, oftentimes break things down. Now I remember when I was a young person, I was very lucky. I have a great set of parents and a great set of grandparents. But I remember there was 2 gentlemen that was in the neighborhood that was very important in kind of keeping an eye on me. One gentleman, his name was Mr. Grimm. Now Mr. Grimm was a pseudo-homeless, right? Now, he would sleep in 3rd floors of people's houses, and he'll hang out in people's garages as he would cook barbecue. But Mr. Grimm was illiterate. He wasn't the most thoughtful person. But whenever I seen him at the corner store, whenever I seen him on the street, he made it a point that he spoke and we had a conversation. And that was very important, because I always knew that I had that eye on him. The other gentleman was Mr. Leeper. Now, Mr. Leeper and my grandfather were best friends, but Mr. Leeper had an addiction. He had addiction to alcohol, and he also had addiction to gambling. But whenever he was around, he always remembered the last conversation we had, and always would ask me, so you told me last week that you were doing this. So what you had on that? Now, even though he had his flaws in his life, but he always made it a point to make sure that he wanted me, or he was keeping aware of what I was doing.
Amazing. Now I actually want to hear from Brother Armand. I want you to tell us how, as the voice of our young people, do you personally feel inspired?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Being 20 years old, I honestly feel like being inspired to me personally is taking an asset that I already have and being inspired to keep going on doing what I'm doing if it's positive, of course. And if I were negative, then I would want my negativity to be recognized and talked to me about, but not in a destructive manner. I would want everything that I can do to be a little broader. I would want to broaden my horizon. I would also like myself to be surrounded with people who also want to broaden their horizon. Like, I've been spending some time with Pastor Quincy, and he's been showing me and teaching me a whole lot about things that I never really took the time to think about. I also am a gospel rap artist, but I feel that not just that, but so much more can come from that. Poetry and just doing things that can get my mind off of everything that's going on and lead me into a positive way. Being inspired by political figures and adults that I meet plays a real big part in inspiration.
Thank you, Armand. So important to be the voice of the youth. Now, Ms. Goldstein, tell us, we know that you have a great reputation of inspiring the community. Tell us what some of your effectual tactics are.
Well, let me first say, being the oldest one on the panel, you know, I come from a time when many of you all did, when we really looked out for one another.
Yeah, right.
And that is, counseling said, you know, there were people in your neighborhood that took interest in you. And they took interest in you, not only talking to you, but also handling you when you were out of sorts. Again, you can't do that today. But what we can do is to find out as much as possible what's going on with your neighbor. There's some things that are going on in these homes that if you were to go in there, and I know the commander knows this, it sometimes is so heartbreaking. And when you begin to see children, start looking in their faces. That is one of the tactics that we use. Look in their faces. Look in their eyes. And when you see eyes that are hopeless because there's so much that is against them, then you try to see what's going on in that home.
Commander, please elaborate on this.
I don't know how I make that better, but she's exactly right. As police officers, we get called to homes all the time. And like Ms. Goldston said, one of the things that we're trained to do when we're in a home and we're looking at that home, we see children, and you're looking in the eyes of hunger, and you're looking in the eyes of abuse, and sexual abuse, and desperation. And we go to the refrigerator, we open that refrigerator, and we see, is there food? Is there food for the next meal in that refrigerator? We open up the cabinets, and we look in those cabinets and see, is that child going to be hungry when 6 o'clock comes and it's dinner time and nobody's there to feed that child? And then as police officers, what we do, we're certainly going to reach out to some of the organizations that are around in the area in order to help these kids. But we can't leave those kids in those situations. Far too often, these kids are embarrassed about their situation and they won't reach beyond that home for fear of being bullied or embarrassed by their peers. So it's up to us as adults, as police officers, as neighbors, as council folks, as pastors. It's up to us to identify that need and reach for them, because they're going to be too embarrassed, too ashamed of their situation, which they didn't create. They're going to be too ashamed to reach for help. And they're the most needing people that we have in our population.
Thank you so much. Now, Reverend Quincy, Tell us, when you wrote this chapter, Inspire Black Lives, what were you thinking about?
Come on with it.
It's a lot of what we heard here around this table, is that there are so many times when we look at individuals, we don't see the individuals for who they are, but we see the individuals for what our perception is. And so, as the councilman says, greeting young people who you don't know. And it's funny because I make a habit when I see kids, especially young black boys or young black children, when you see, one of the challenges is they don't feel seen. They just absolutely feel like they don't matter, they don't exist. So when you say to them, you're in the grocery store and you walk in and you say, hey, how you doing, little man? Or how are you doing? I usually don't say you little man because you don't want to kind of build it up too big. but how you doing, little guy? What happens is that it immediately says to him that you recognize, that you see him, that he exists. And I think that's one of the things, is that when you look at what we experienced with Jim Crow and with all of the things that we've done in our nation, what happens is that you look at the fact that even in the midst of separate but unequal schools, some of the greatest black minds of all time came forward. So why is it now that we have, first-rate, Class A educational systems somewhere there they exist, but with all of these benefits that we have in terms of our educational system, and we have now we can inspire, because what happened in those schools when they were separate and unequal is that you were inspired. You were inspired. Some teacher told you, you may not have books, you may not have a desk, but you're going to be somebody in life. And we don't do that enough these days. And so, as the commander said, meeting their needs, as Ms. Goldstein said, looking into their eyes. One of the things that we have a tendency to do is we have a tendency to see people for what we think of them and not see people for what they are. So we see people all the time in our midst, and we think they, quote unquote, I'll say, got it going on. And we think that they have everything in place, but we don't know the hurt that's behind those closed doors. And so if we don't start treating people like they are somebody and that they deserve respect, then we shut out the opportunities to be able to help somebody when they need it.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend Quincy. Now that we're learning that it's important to see our faces in the youth and to really recognize them, how can we learn to respect them and teach them to respect themselves? Let's start with Armand this time.
I honestly believe that, okay, well, first of all, I would like to start off by saying this is one of my favorite chapters in the book, Inspire Black Lives, and I would like to start off by reading a couple of sentences from the chapter. It says, we must love them when they don't feel as if they can be loved, and we must love the seemingly unlovable. Teenagers can be hard to love sometimes, but that's exactly what they need to be loved. So I feel like to respect black lives, especially black young lives, we should not only voice that we respect them, but visibly show that we respect them as well. And just like children going to church, they don't like, a lot of them don't like going to church because of the things that they either see when they go into church that are negative, or the people that they see from church, outside of church, doing something that is outside of character that they portray. So when we think of the word respect, we firstly think of respect as it's supposed to be equal. I give you respect if you give me respect, right? So it's like respecting lives is showing love and showing that you care, and not just saying, hey, how you doing? But I want to invite you to our Band of Brothers group on Tuesday. I want to invite you to our Bible study on Wednesday. Here's my number. Call me if you need any advice. So.
Yes, that's exactly what it means. Armand, R-E-S-P-C-T.
Right.
Tell us, Commander, what does it mean to you? Respect.
Outstanding, and you did an outstanding job explaining that. Let me, I think it's very important for us to realize that when we are talking about respect and specifically respect, that things are not always equal. I know in my house, my mother didn't say she will respect me. I didn't say to my mother, I will respect her if she respects me. I think that I would have went rolling across the carpet had I said that. So we have to understand our roles in life, and that goes not only from the home, but also into the schools. Far too many times we have situations where teachers lose control of their classrooms because there's no respect in that classroom. And that goes also into law enforcement, into life itself, is you have to respect authority. You have to learn to respect authority wherever authority is. You may not like what that authority symbolizes. You may not like what you have seen in the media. You may like that individual that represents that authority, but you have to respect that. And when you learn to respect that authority, then you can build that relationship that you need with that individual, whether it be a parent or a teacher or a police officer or a pastor. You get to develop that relationship that you can build upon. So that's what I would think about respect.
All right.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, Councilman, how do you, in your line of work, build respecting relationships with people you come in contact with?
One thing I think is, I have to be reminded not only as an individual, but also as a public official, that we are mirrors to these young people. We're mirrors to the children. They see what we do, even though we think that we're behind closed doors or doing something someplace else. And I think that as an adult, we have to be reminded that, just like the young man said, sometimes they may see somebody doing some of the things out of character. But I think what's important is understanding that children are not finished growing. And if all of you have raised children, understand that the teenage years are the most difficult point of their lives. And often those times are when those relationships are strained between the parent and the child, let alone trying to have a relationship with another child or trying to interact with someone else's child. And it's not eluding respect and also and demanding respect back is something that's very difficult, but it's something that you have to take your time with. You understand that these kids are still trying to figure out themselves. They don't necessarily understand the definition of respect. They may understand the definition of power, they may understand the definition of fear, but they have not learned the nuances of respect. And it's important for us to try to teach them in our actions and the way that we conduct ourselves. I remember we used to have a program at John Adams where we would talk with the kids every 2 weeks. And they were in the age, and we had the kids from the time they was in the 9th grade all the way to the senior year. So you get to know the kids a little bit. And I remember these two young men that I've known that were happened to be friends forever got into a fight that day. I put a knockdown, drag-out fight in the building. And then when I get up there and I ask them, so what happened? The one young man said, I just told him I love him. He interpreted it as being that I was on to him and that I was a homosexual, and then here we are fighting, right? And what it was is the young man that expressed his love for his friend had a more evolved sense of respect and love. But what it reminded me is that all children don't develop at the same rate. They don't have the same examples. So you have to be mindful that when you talk with these kids, you still got to teach them, right? Because you don't know how they're learning this stuff. So first thing is always be mindful that whatever we do in our homes or in public, somebody's going to remember it. Somebody's going to look at it. And the second thing is you got to take your time with these kids, because just like when you're raising your children, you sometimes want to strangle them, You don't know what's you know what you're going to get on the other end. Just take your time a little bit. They'll grow out of it.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Goldstein, could you break that down a little bit more for us? Tell us practically, when we leave here today, how can we be more respectful?
Wow. One of the things that we need to understand, we're dealing with 4 generations of folks who have lost their way. So when you talk about the generation, like my young man here, we have families where the mother is in a difficult situation, doesn't know about respect. You got grandma, and now we're finding great-grandmothers coming in, acting up, cussing everybody out, and like the councilman said, so the children are watching that. And they're mimicking that behavior. So one of the things that we have to do is focus on those other generations. And I like what Reverend has in the book about different activities. And we have to figure out how we can get some of these older folks into these activities so the children can watch what good behavior. These children are not seeing good behavior.
All right.
They're not. They're only mimicking what they see out here on the streets, like the councilman said, and in their homes. In their home. How many of you have been in the store and you've seen little kids, like that baby right there, get pushed, pulled, and cussed out? And I'm not talking about getting rough. I'm talking about cussed out, spanked, and almost knocked to the ground. These are the folks that grow up, and the only respect that they have is none, because they've been taught this is how you treat people. So one of the things that we have to do is understand this is a generational issue. And I'd like to say something about when I became a young adult. I wanted to go in, first thing I wanted to do after I graduated from college was to go in the bar. So I go in the bar on 116th Street. Who did I see coming out with his girlfriend was our director of our choir. So then as I'm looking at him, because I knew it wasn't his wife, and then I got to thinking, now, he also was my Sunday school teacher. So when I went home and told my folks about it, of course, it wasn't nice. And of course, they had a meeting about it right away at the church, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's how they handle stuff like this. But my point of the matter is that it had a far-reaching effect, because that was not how you conducted yourself.
That's right. Amen.
Yes, and Reverend Quincy, you in the community have set such a great example for all of us to follow. How can we earn respect?
I was always taught that respect begets respect. So what I try to do is, rather than walk in the room and expect people to respect me because I'm a pastor, or to respect me because I'm an adult, then what I started doing is doling out respect. Doling out to all of the young people around me. Say, hey, how are you, young man, Mr. There's certain, and then you can see it, going back to the eyes concept, you can see it. Sometimes certain students, I literally call them by their last name, Mr. So-and-so. Right? Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to fight against so many years of pain, so many years of hurt, and so many years of disrespect. For the black community, respect is huge, because sometimes that's all we had. You know, and sometimes, and it's been hard fought in a lot of cases. And so when you look at a lot of the stuff that we deal with, whether it's in the schools, whether it's with our law enforcement, whether it's with each other, even in churches, a lot of it really boils down to, I've been disrespected. So part of it is that we're teaching a generation to be hypersensitive about what respect is, and so then they kick back every time they feel the slight amount of disrespect. But on the other hand, the way we get respect is to give respect. And so we change the paradigm instead of just expecting it to come and begin to dole it out, then we'll find that it will come back to us automatically, and it'll come back to us far more. But the issue here, as we deal with these young people, is teaching them what respect looks like. And in a lot of cases, we don't do that. They don't get to do it. One of the things I talked about in the book is this student that came to my office at the church and shared that he was a Muslim. And so rather than me saying, well, you need Jesus and you need to get saved and you need, what I did is I addressed him where he was. I met him exactly where he was, and so I asked him, what branch of Islam? Well, of course, he was taken aback because he's like, I don't know, what do you mean, what branch of Islam? But what happened is that rather than to just push back so quickly, my response was to meet him where he was. And, okay, so let's talk about what Islam is to you. And as a result, as the book mentions, he eventually joined the church and eventually became our youth president. But it was met because we were able to respect him from the beginning, and that allowed him to feel good and even to come back again. And I think that's one of the most important parts about gaining respect.
Now let's talk about why we're all here today. What is the most important motivating factor in Black lives? And that is love. Now, Councilman, you already touched on this a little bit. Tell us, how do we love Black lives?
Well, I think it's not a nebulous thing. We look at it. If you love yourself, right? If you're taught that if you love yourself, you have to love your neighbor. You have to love other folks. Now, sometimes some people are tougher to love than others. Sometimes people do stuff that makes it very difficult. But you got to understand that it's so much easier when you're dealing with folks if you have the respect, then when you have the foundation of love, and is when you go around and you hate this person, you can't stand this person. And especially when I always look at it from my point of view. If it ever gets to a point where I'm doing this job or any job, and I hate what I'm doing, or I hate dealing with folks, or I don't feel as though that I don't enjoy what I'm doing, you gotta quit. It's so much easier if you love, if you come out with that sense like the pastor mentioned, dole out respect. When you dole out love, in that same sense, you'll be surprised how it takes down the tensions in the room, how it takes down the tensions in individuals, and how it allows you to have a better relationship. It also is about being positive, because it's often the case that many of our lives have never always been easy, right? It's been, in our society, things are not always easy. But we always had this sense that you have a sense of hope for what the future is. It's so much easier to be hopeful and mindful for what's going to be in the future as being negative to what you got right now. So you always try to elude a sense of, I love this person because God created him.
Yes, Commander. Now, you risk your life for people. So how did you fall in love with the community?
Excellent question. And before I get to how I fell in love with the community, let me say this, is to truly love somebody or have somebody love you in return, you have to deal with a person's pain. Because the pain, whatever pain they feel, wherever it came from in their life, from the beginning of life to the day that you met that individual, that is what caused or can cause an individual to put up walls that prevent them from loving you back. You can love somebody unconditionally, and they can love you back, but they can never show it unless you deal with that pain. The way I fell in love with the community is because I came from a community that looks like this community. I came from Glenville. I was born and raised in Glenville off of East 105th. Yeah, we ate egg sandwiches and peanut butter sandwiches for dinner when things got tough. But you know what? It made me a stronger person. And what actually happened along the way is the respect that we talked about earlier in this program. That respect existed on our street, where everybody on that street knew my first name, my last name, and knew my parents, and could take me home after they whipped my behind. So that caused me to love that community. And since the community that I serve as a police officer, excuse me, Pastor, as a police officer is a reflection of what I grew up with, and that's why I love this community. It's because I see, when I look out and I see elders, I see the elders that walked me home, that made me a better boy and eventually made me a better man. When I see the young men, the young men like this young man here today, I see the young men that came up out of Glenville where people say, well, the odds are against you, that they're now lawyers and doctors and police officers and so on. So I see, when I look out into this community, I'm inspired. I love it. because I see the potential of the community, of the people in the community.
Awesome, awesome. Reverend Quincy, you teach us at Lee Road about the greatest love of all. That's God's love. So tell us how God's love has helped you love Black lives and all lives.
Well, it's foundational. I told the congregation the other day that I loved them before I met them. Not because of anything that they did or gave or presented to me, but because God instilled in me the concept of love. And the councilman alluded to, when you love yourself, it makes it easier to love others, which is why loving yourself is so essential. But as the commander mentioned, when you've experienced so much pain, sometimes you can't love yourself, so it's difficult for you to show love to other individuals. I think that as we've developed together what I like to call the uncommon community, where we begin to love people unconditionally, it just begins to manifest itself in other people. And excuse me, as we continue to demonstrate, live, and present love to other people, then love comes back, but people learn how to love. The reason people don't, we learn how to love from somebody, and so we were able then to pass that on. And if I never learned how to love, I would have nothing to pass on. So it's really just about taking what we have and passing it on and paying it forward and making sure that, again, as we said, these young people who sometimes feel unlovable, they feel like they don't even deserve to be loved, how we can take those individuals and demonstrate a level of love to them so that they can then feel like they matter and they mean something, they have something to offer to the world.
Thank you, thank you. Ms. Goldstein, tell us about how we can love through forgiveness.
Well, when we talk about our spiritual life, the first thing we want to remember is that we were forgiven. And so because we were forgiven, it should be something that we ought to be able to do to forgive others. And we talk to young people about that all the time. And I'm so glad that in the social services arena, they are allowing us to talk about the spiritualness. Because at one time, you couldn't do that. And so what we say to a lot of young people, like Reverend Quincy just says, that even if your mother doesn't love you, or you don't feel that your father loves you, there is someone that loves you. God loves you. And when you say to them in that tone of voice that God loves you, like this young man said, then they want to find out who is God and what is he about. The other thing is that when, and I have to talk about the old school stuff, when we were in school, many of us, there were teachers that told us they loved us. Like Commander said, there was a neighbor next door that told you that you were lovable. No matter what you did, that you were lovable. So we need to begin to do that again, as Reverend Quincy said, letting the young people know that they're loved. And this is a plug for those of you who want to foster. There are a lot of children who are in foster care. No one has ever showed them any love. Many of our children have never been held and kissed and told that they were loved. That's a lot of what you're facing now. Children who feel unloved. And then, you know, the other thing that happens with them is the self-esteem issue. Then the self-esteem begins to play. I look ugly, so I'm gonna act ugly. I'm gonna walk ugly. I'm gonna do everything that I can to bring you to me to show you how ugly I can be. Thank you. You know, I get very emotional when I talk about self-esteem. I really do. Because it's a big issue.
Yes, it is, it is. Now, Armand, tell us, how do you feel most loved as a young man in the community?
I feel most loved as a young man in the community when an older individual lets me know that they're here for me. Before I really got deep into the church that I was, I've ran the streets, I've been with the wrong crowd. A lot of the young children are dying now. I know them. to hang around the same people that they hung around, the same type. So I've seen and experienced a lot of things, and one thing I think that the adults have to also realize is that you can never control what they're doing when they're not with you. But when they are with you, leave them with something that they can remember. Because even if they don't love themselves, and you know what love is, and you're able to show them, you have to also consider the fact that when they're not with you, they might be around people who don't love themselves at all. And it just begins to reflect and ricochet off into them, so they feel like that that's the only way that they can conduct themselves as young people. They want to feel like, they want to feel like they matter. They want to feel like their voice isn't muted because of their age, or because of their race, or because of the area that they live in. They want to feel like they're protected. A lot of times I've heard people say that even though we have police, I still don't feel safe. But I also feel like that on the contrary to that is that if you have an impact on a younger individual, if they push to do better, then they will. And you will actually see the ones who want to do better and the ones who just want to stay in the same position that they are.
Awesome, thank you. Let's give everybody a round of applause for those great answers. Now, before we continue, I do want to let you know that this conversation is open to everyone. So there are index cards, just like this one, that you can write on in the back with your questions, and we will take 30 minutes, if we have the time, to answer some of those questions with our great panelists. Also, just so you know, there's a registration form as well, so you can get more information about Black Lives Matter. Now, without any further ado, let's continue this hot topic conversation with talking about one of the very important fundamental principles of having a life that matters, which is education. So I actually want to start off with Reverend Quincy this time, because he, to me, is an example of why school is so important. Pastor?
I don't get a question. I want to say, what comes to my mind immediately is I'm grateful. I'm grateful to God for Lee Road Baptist Church. One of the things that is unique about Lee Road Baptist Church is how many members of the congregation are retired educators and who have worked in the field of education, not to mention how many have actually been educated themselves. And that's a great plus. We recognize in our society that becoming something, being someone, is really tied to education. Our upward mobility, our economic status, our social economic standing, it really is tied to education. There's no question about that. We all pretty much know that. So education is a key component of a successful life, and being able to live a life that not only matters, but that you feel matters. And so we have, we've been doing some things in terms of trying to connect with the students around us. One of the first things I recognized when I came to Lee Road is that hundreds of students pass through our parking lot every single day. And it just really provides for us a unique opportunity to help some young people. John F. Kennedy High School is a rock's throw from us. And so one of the things that we did, Gail Reese with the Ministry of Reconciliation has promoted the Adopt a School program for churches in our community. So we adopted John F. Kennedy, and even before we adopted John F. Kennedy, we spent some time visiting John F. Kennedy. We visited Shaw High School, and some of the concepts that we want to do with changing the educational process. But helping our students get educated, helping them to find value in education, goes back to the whole inspiration thing. If we can help them find value in education, then they'll take seriously their education. And so then when they'll start going to school, looking forward to being taught, looking forward to be educated, looking forward to be taught something that they don't know. And I think a lot of times that we take that for granted. We kind of figure that that's an automatic, well, you should know. No one knows anything until it's taught to them. And my philosophy is that if I haven't taught it to you, I don't expect you to know it. And so one of the things we have to do is to work more diligently with our educational system. We can get involved in schools. We're trying to promote that at the but we also need to promote that across the board. Everyone can walk into a school and say, hey, what can we do to make a difference? There are reading programs that they have where you can come in and read to students in schools. You can come in sometime and monitor the lunch period. You can come in and work with monitoring the OGT. You can come in. There's so many different ways in which we can engage our system. We can vote. We can vote in school board elections. We can vote for levies. You know, so many times the school board elections are the lowest, the lowest, 3-5% turnout for school board elections. Yeah, that is one of the most critical areas in our society. And so I know here in Cleveland we have the educational czar. What's it called again? Well, I'm talking about the guy, CEO. The CEO. So I mean, but the idea is to get involved and to stop sitting back saying somebody else is going to do what we have essentially been called to do and what we can do to inspire someone else to take education seriously. So I'm going to stop there because I could go on and I'm going to hold up the mic.
Well, Commander, now we know about education with our degrees and with our certificates, but a person who just wants to get started, a person who maybe has been out of the school system, how can they learn again?
It's never too late. I want to back up even before that person because I read a study years ago. Well, I saw a study. I didn't read the whole thing. And some people in this room might be more informed about it than I am. But there was a study that said that because of the test that they give, I think it was the 3rd grade, that they knew how many prison beds they would have to have at a certain time. And that goes directly to the educational level of our young men and women. If they can determine, because if you didn't score well on a test, because your foundation suffered, your educational foundation suffered, then they can predict that you would be in prison by a certain age, then that speaks volumes. Now, I don't know if that's still a valid form that they use or not, but you got to think about something along those lines. So even if you have missed that foundation, and I talk to young men all the time, even if you missed that foundation, it's never too late to get that education. It's key to your success. When I go into the schools and I talk to young men in schools, especially the athletes, for some reason I'm drawn to the athletes because once upon a time I was athletic. And I talk to the athletes and I ask them what they want to be, and they want to be Michael Jordan, and they want to be LeBron James, and they want to be Adrian Peterson, and I get all these things. And years past I would always say, oh, well, what's your backup plan? Because you know that only a small percentage of people make it. And I stopped doing that. I stopped stepping on these young folks' dreams. And what I say to them now is I say, well, tell me what's your stage. And they say, well, look at me, what are you talking about, Commander? I said, because I don't see too many recruiters coming to Carouge Park to recruit. But they do go to Duke University, and they go to Morehouse, and they go to Ohio State University. So you tell me what stage you're going to be on so that I can watch you before you go into the NFL. And I get them thinking about education to say, well, you know what? Yeah, I'm pretty doggone good at football, but I better be thinking about a college right now if I want to have that stage to get to the NFL. So I try to promote that education at every level of these young individuals that I run across. And I truly believe that that's the key to their success, is to have that foundation.
Fantastic. Let's give them a round of applause. So, Councilman, you found great success in the community, and I believe you would attribute education to that. How have your personal experiences benefited you?
Well, I think education is all-encompassing. It's not only is it the literacy and the academics, but it's also what Ms. Golston talked about earlier. That's where you learn so many different lessons that's not necessarily taught in the classroom, about respect, about self-esteem, about who you are, about how you interact with individuals. And some children, they find schools to be scary places. There's a couple schools in the neighborhood that have what's called the lunch bag program. Is that what they do is that at the end of the school day and on the weekends, they send these young people home with enough food for the children that's in the house to get them back to Monday. Or if it's a long weekend, to get them back to whenever they come back to school. And if they really need it, get them back to the next day. And they have to be creative of how they pass that stuff out. Because some kids, like the commander said, are embarrassed. Some kids have too much stuff to carry because they have so many people in need in their house. So what we have to do is, education is not just about the academics. It's about creating an environment in which these children feel free to be themselves and to learn. I remember the commander and me, we went to Kennedy about 6 months ago. They were just starting, have a new process of learning where they do an acquired sense. And it was right after the time, it was right after the Ferguson riots had begun. And we actually had a police officer involved shooting right on 104th and Kenton. So the commander and myself, we're sitting with ninth graders. And ninth graders at 14 years old sometimes can be a little hair-raising. You know, they kind of, well, me and James, Mr. Rich, we go into the building, sometimes it's a little tough to hold your tongue. But you understand where they are, right? You know, they're young people, they don't understand how to be an adult. And it's so interesting, they were sitting down and they hated police. For whatever reason, they hated police. Until they talked to Commander McCulley, and they realized, you know, to be honest with you, I never ever met a police officer. You know, and they started talking. Then they knew one of the children knew his son. They're like, oh, so you're a real person. You got a real family. and it kind of broke down so many things. And what was valuable to the children is not the fact that, not so much about the fact that of anything he said, not to be disrespectful, is the fact that they were seeing what an adult looks like. Not just the teacher, which is important, but it's also having adults in the building. Just simple stuff about going to work every day, paying bills, sometimes can be so foreign to so many people. It's foreign to adults, let alone to a child that never lived in a stable environment. And just seeing what it is to be able to pay a house note, pay a car note, just to be a regular person. You don't always need guest speakers to come in these buildings, interact with these children that have accomplished so many different things in education or careers. Just being a basic person that raised their family and took care of themselves, sometimes is just enough to get the child ready to learn. And also, so that's when the pastor talks about just going into school building. It's not that tough, right? Now, like sometimes it's stressful, but the message that needs to be conveyed to these children is not that tough. It's just simple stuff. You'd be surprised about the basic questions they will ask you that you would think that, how are you at 14 you don't know that? But like the folks have said, they haven't been taught that, or they don't see that on a regular basis. And just having somebody to talk to is sometimes is more than enough.
Yes, it's more than enough. Now, Ms. Goldstein, we know that education is a journey. You shared with us how even when you graduated, you were still learning about your church and your community. How have you continued to engage your mind to have higher learning ever since then?
Well, I read all the time. And I try to, this young man just showed me something I can do differently, but with my cell phone. So I didn't even know how to work it. So I learned something tonight, because I didn't even know how to shut it down. So, you know, being always in the frame of mind that you want to learn. Because learning is very important. And that there's something that you're going to leave out of here tonight that you didn't understand or realize before. That's a learning experience. And you're educated by that experience that you're having. One of the things that we need to do with our young people, I'm reading a book now about what makes a successful child. And it talks about the school, it talks about the neighborhood, it talks about the entire community. And one of the things, even with talking about education, they talk about what a good school should be about. One of the differences between our school and a lot of other schools is that we don't talk about the value of being an African American in these schools. Now, we're learning more about the folks who have done some wonderful things and the recognition that they have, but when they leave the school, they a lot of times don't get those same opportunities by having the same books at their home. So I've learned about Marcus Garvey. What did he do? So you learn it in school, so when you come home, is there a book about Marcus Garvey at the house? And that's all about education. And the other piece that I want to say about education for our young people, a lot of them are not seeing the fruits of going to school. They're not seeing it. So that's why the encouragement, like the councilman said, and seeing someone like the commander who is a real person. Mr. Tanton always talks about his job at Chrysler. Anyone that knows Mr. Tanton, they know that he talks about how he got that job at Chrysler. He wasn't looking for that job at Chrysler, but he happened to go into that job at Chrysler. Well, you can't do that anymore. There's no way that you can go into a job like Chrysler anymore. Just off the street, you can't do that. So we need to work with our mom and his friends to tell them, you can become an entrepreneur. Our folks used to be entrepreneurs. They were educated, they studied, they learned to become entrepreneurs themselves. How many of you all know folks who took care of themselves a long time ago? What did they do? They started their own businesses. They supported one another. Junior can't get a job? Well, we're going to set you up in something if you don't do nothing but buy your lawnmower. Thank you.
Now, Armand, I'm happy to ask you this question. As a young man who is pursuing an education, how do we get rid of the excuses, the things that prohibit us, the things that keep us from getting further education?
Well, first of all, I would like to say, us young people, the first thing that we look at is money. So we think about money and we feel like we always want a shortcut to getting that money. So we look at people like the creators of social media who didn't really go to school, right? So we feel like if we could do something like that, then we shouldn't even have to go to school and get an education. And then even in school, we feel like, well, when am I going to ever have to use this? Like, and that's like not just with math or science, it's with every subject possible. And even college students think about it as well. I feel like our excuses are as far as we push ourselves to do better. So I know some people say if you know better, then you would do better. But it's a lot of times that a lot of people really don't know better at all, and it's hard to realize and recognize that. So when it comes to education, you also want to give a helping hand to the ones who don't understand that you could get money doing something that you love as well and helping somebody else to do the same.
Thank you.
couple of things I want to, because and it's highlighted in the book, but it's really, really, I think, important for us. Is one of the things in our community is that black males had this process mentality that education is not masculine. And I think that becomes a big problem when we believe that, well, you know, if a kid has straight A's, boy, what's wrong with you? And there's so many things that we as individuals instill in our young people to diminish their capacity, their drive, and their strength. And we don't even know it. We do it all the time. We'll ask the boy how's his athletics, and we ask the girl how's her academics. And we have to make sure that we instill within them the value of education. As Armand mentioned, they do have. We all had a money thing. Until you recognize that you can make money at anything you do as long as you do it well, you have that desire for money. That's why he went to Chrysler. I mean, amen. Especially back then, they knew Chrysler was making some money. But the part of it is that we've got to make sure we instill the proper values, and that's one of the challenges that we have is the values. So when you talk about, Zuckerberg, you talk about Steve Jobs, and you talk about what's my man? Come on. Yeah, Bill Gates. You talk about these guys that they didn't finish college. They were accepted. They went to Harvard. Right. So I mean, they went to Harvard. So getting to Harvard by itself is something, right? So it's not like they just came off from the hood and said, "I'm gonna become the Microsoft." So we have to put those things in perspective, because when we let them just believe that it's okay to drop out of college and go make billions of dollars, they miss. There's some concepts. These are some brilliant guys who, yes, they didn't finish school, but they were brilliant when they arrived there in the first place. I think those are the things I wanted to say. At this time, I'm going to ask you to indulge us just for a minute. If you don't mind, if you give us a moment to take a little break, and then we'll come right back to you. Is that okay?
So Armand, take it away. How are you involved and engaged in the community?
Welcome back, everybody. I am involved in the community in church activities that reach out to the community. We accept you as you come, and we don't judge you at all. And that's another thing that I feel like everybody in every community, every church and every school should do. They almost feel like they're prohibited because deep down on the inside, they feel like they don't belong. So this is good. So engaging in the community is really inviting people to help motivate and help inspire others to do something on the positive side that can straighten them away from the negative.
Thank you. Ms. Goldstein, how do you encourage the youth that you come across to get involved in the community?
We're just begun a new program, implementing a new program, and it's called I've Got My Eyes on You. And it's all about engaging the young people to not only support one another, but also to help with senior citizens. We try to make sure that young people are paired with a senior citizen. We do trash pulling on Sunday nights for those who get their trash pulled on Monday. So we've got a group of young men that help to do that. We also have a group of young men and women who check on seniors. We used to do that a lot, and because I think the councilman said it earlier, people are afraid. So what we do now is that we have the young people telephone before they go, and they go over and they see what is it that the senior needs. If they need trash picked up, something as little as trash picked up, but having the young people give back in the community, and it also helps to solve the issue of people being afraid of our young people. I think if there's something for them to get value from, they will do it. They just have to be encouraged. And what we always say to our seniors in health, don't be afraid. And I always like to say, and don't show fear. You know, when you go to the grocery store, you don't hold your pocketbook all up here. That just invites trouble. If you got to carry a pocketbook, carry a small one. But don't be holding it all up against here and looking all around, because that invites trouble. So what we try to do now is make sure we have young people to go with seniors if they have to go to out there to Lee Harvard Shopping Center, or we have them to go to Walgreens, wherever they have to go, and they just feel like they need someone to go with them because they don't have anyone. We'll do that. And again, the program is called I'm Watching You. I've got my eyes on you, and I'm making sure I'm looking at you. Because our young people have to understand that, as I did, I'm not going to say anything about them, but as I did, I got old. And I always thought I was going to be young. So I want to make sure that I start preparing the young people so when they see me, they won't try to hurt me.
Reverend Quincy, you by far have to be one of the people that I see engages everyone. You reach out to the community, you talk to people, and you say, come, be a part of Lee Road. What inspires you to reach out?
I think that what kind of inspires me is that I recognize that we're all in this cosmos together. And the more we kind of look at ourselves as separate, as entities on our island, I guess it's my foundation in Christianity. Christianity was never intended to be an individual religion. We're blessed that we all have our Bibles on our counters and on our desks. Excuse me, but the Bible was not written for individual reading. The Bible was written to communities. The idea of Christianity is that we're working together. We were never intended to be individual islands. And I think that, and my experience has shown, that the more we work together, the farther we go, and the more people we impact. The more lives we save, the more people understand that their lives matter. And so the idea for me is we all need to come together, work together. The things that Mrs. Goldstein is doing at the Harvard Community Center ought to be connected with what we're doing at Lee Road, ought to be connected to what the councilman is doing out of the councilman's office, ought to be connected to what's happening at the 4th district, ought to be connected to what we're doing in our streets, because a couple of weeks ago, we had a repast for one of the young men who was killed in our community. And at that repast, we were in here with a bunch of young people who most people probably honestly would not have felt comfortable being with. But at the end of the day, what happened on that particular evening is that, in all honesty, these weren't, for me, coming into this place and sitting outside talking with them, these were not thugs. They were young people who were hurting because they lost a friend. At that moment, they were in mourning. And so to not acknowledge that they're in mourning and to not engage their mourning and try to bring them through their grief allows us to miss an opportunity for helping them understand their life better and bringing them into the mainstream of our community. Too many times we want to ostracize people and kind of lock them out or lock them up, but in some shape or form keep them away from us so that we can feel safe. And the more we do that, the more problems we have. The other part of engagement, as the commander mentioned so eloquently, and I just want to pause here for a moment to say thank you to the commander, not only just for being here, but I want to thank the commander for, like you said, constantly putting his life on the line, and all of the men and women who work with him to put their life on the line. So I think that we need to pause just to say thank you for all that work. Because it's essential for us to understand it, and he brought up a very good point, and Councilman Pruitt echoed that point. He loved the community because he's a product of the community. He recognizes the community. He doesn't necessarily see the same people who brought him up, but when he sees those people, they're reminiscent. When we watch the TV and we see someone got, killed in the park or missing in the park, and they don't look like us, we say, well, what was she in the park for? But when there's a picture that comes on the screen of Shaniqua, who was taken or who's lost or who's missing, she looks like somebody we know. And so the heartstrings tug differently. And that's one of the things we talk about, this like-mindedness. If we don't work to engage our young people and to get our young people involved in the policing of our neighborhoods, right? If what you said, you know, and I did the same thing. I went to a school, St. Stan, and I went there and I asked, I said, how many of you all want to be police officers? And none of them raised their hands. Now parenthetically, that's really strange, because when we were coming up, everybody wanted to be every boy wanted to be a police officer. You know, we go back to the dragnet thing. You know, everyone wanted to be a police officer. But now none of our students want to be police officers. And so I began to engage and talk to them about why. And so that as we begin to talk about it, I said, well, the fact of the matter is that if none of us are police officers, then where are the police officers going to come from? They're all going to come from outside of our community. They're not going to recognize us. They're not going to see any of us as being like them. And as a result, we're going to have a continuation of a broad problem within our community. And so that happens in policing. It happens in our schools. It happens in our stores. It happens in our business. It happens in everything. So engaging is essential, because we have to set the stage and to set the example and to set the standard for engagement for the next generation. Because many of us have experienced engagement, but we're not passing it on. And so they're not going to know how to engage, because they have never been engaged. And our job is to make sure we reverse that.
Thank you. Commander, when you come across these young men and they're involved in the wrong types of activities, such as gangs, violence, black-on-black crime, how can we transfer that energy and put it into something more positive?
Excellent question. Well, I think what we have to do, and it's been said, Ms. Goldston, we have to bridge the gap between the seniors and our young population. Because when I look at it in the context of community pride. I remember when we were in school, you had school pride, you had community pride, and as I drive up and down the streets of Ward 1, I see community pride. I see lawns are manicured. I see porch lights on. I see that. Yeah, you can look at a person's house and tell that they have pride in their house and in the neighborhood. But when you talk to some of the young folks, some of the gangbangers, not like, thank goodness, not like the lovely young man here today, he is representing young folks well. But when I look at some of the gangbangers and you ask them about it, yeah, they claim the street. They claim, yeah, this is my hood, this is my street, but they claim it with a different pride than the seniors are claiming it with. So what we have to do, in my opinion, is we have to find a way to bridge that pride with the pride that we already have as homeowners, as stakeholders in the community, and let them know if you're going to claim the hood, claim it for positive reasons, not because you're gangbanging, not because you own this or selling dope from this property. So once we figure out how to do that, I think that we're going to have a better neighborhood. We're going to have more pride in the neighborhood, and if there's any pride there, then community becomes healthy again.
Councilman, tell us, what have you noticed are the trends among young people nowadays of which they would want to be involved in the community?
I think it's a difficult question, because young people communicate and they operate much differently, even than myself, especially with the seniors, right? Society in general is becoming less and less connected. And it's becoming more and more individualized. You see that reflected in the way that people will rather send a text message versus pick up the phone and call. And some of you are probably like, what is a text message? but the point is that as society is becoming more individualized. And it's tough to try to get people to realize that you are connected. Now, some folks do look for connection. You have some young people that are looking and yearning for connection. That's why they join gangs. That's why they claim certain objects as being deities and things of that nature. And so we got to find a way that you can identify that want and that need and communicate with them in their level. Now, it's very difficult because many of us as an adults have been taught a certain way, have seen success from going to operate a certain way. In our age, you don't want to change, right? But if you really want to try to connect with a young person, it takes a lot of time, and it's not. I just reflect about trying to raise my son, and I know what kind of trouble we had, and imagine trying to connect with another young person who does not have the same values or have not seen the same sense of what a family is and how to operate. But the key thing is, young people do want to connect. They just communicate differently. They operate in different venues. It's not, they don't, it was a book that I read when I was a student. It's called Bowling Alone. And it was talking about, and I always tease my wife, and I always ask her, what is 3 things every Clevelander does? One of them is they play darts, play pool, and bowl, right? That's because we had communities that went out and they did social activity. That's why you had so many street clubs in this community. That's why you had so many community organizations in this community. That's why you had so many churches grow and thrive. But society is getting smaller. You have less and less folks who are coming to those type of activities. But kids still want some sort of connection. And trying to figure out how do you fill that need for their connection and communicate on that level is very difficult. And one thing is, like you said, you start out with the individual. It goes back to just speaking to that person when you see them. That right there, that innate human connection is something that was given to us from birth, and you try to grow it from there.
Amazing. So Ms. Goldstein, we're going to kind of switch the topic, and we're going to talk about how we can feel protected in our community. I want you to tell us, now that there is a disconnect between the generations, how can our seniors and our older adults feel safe in their community? How can we feel protected?
You know, one of the things that can begin to happen, and I love the work that Reverend Quincy is doing at Lee Road Baptist Church, and I want you to know that Harvard Community Services Center was born out of Lee Road Baptist Church. That's the history of Harvard Center, so we're your children. But you know, one of the things that, and I want to get back to this engagement piece, until we begin to recognize, and the councilman hit on it a moment ago, and I heard him and Commander talking about their children. We need to talk about these dads. There is such a disconnect with all of this because dads are not around. And we need to figure out some kind of way to engage these dads in these young people's lives. And they need to be able to understand that lives matter and that their lives as a dad matters. But that's not what you asked me.
That's good.
Good.
But what you asked me was,
how can we feel safer as the generations are divided? How can we bond together and feel protected?
well, I think one of the things, and I'm so happy that the councilman had a listening tour at Harvard back here. I think it was either January or February. And policemen were there. And I think for most of us, we see Commander McCulley all the time, but some of the gentlemen that work up under Commander McCulley, you don't see them unless you're in trouble. So need help. So one of the things we need to know that we have one of the best police force in this country. And so that's the first thing to begin to understand, that you have some policemen that are looking out and caring for you. And then the other thing to feel safe about, how many of you still stay in your home alone? Okay. How much security do you have? And I know this probably is for Commander. How much security do you have? How many of you go in the backyard and the front door is open? While you in the backyard or in the front yard doing work? Do you close those doors and lock them up? Do you let your neighbor know if she doesn't see you it should be every day. If you live alone, your neighbor should be looking out and looking for you every day. How many of you associate with your pastor? Letting him know what's going on with you. And I know you call a councilman. He's part of your safety team. But I think one of the things that can happen is that the more that you feel that you have a network, and I know we come to church on Sunday and we fellowship there, then what happens on Monday? Well, who else are you fellowshipping with? Who else knows about what's going on with you? If you go to the doctor, and you go to the doctor alone, does your neighbor, other than your family, because if your your family's not there, but how many of your neighbors know that you have a doctor's appointment today? I saw Mr. Tan out at South Point. I want to know why was he out there. So he went on and told me why he was out there. That took 30 minutes. That was all right. He knew I saw him and I was checking up on him.
Yeah.
That's me. That's it.
I want to talk to Brother Armand. You had mentioned earlier about how some people don't even feel safe in school anymore. And so a lot of the youth are trying to protect themselves by bringing guns to school. How can we get rid of those types of firearms and get safe?
I honestly feel like we could get out of that mindset of not feeling protected even though we have police is by what the commander was talking about earlier about knowing them, I remember when I was at elementary school, I went to Grace Mount, it's a couple blocks away from here. We used to have days taken out that we met with police officers, and we had something called the DARE program. We met with police officers, we met with firemen and fire trucks. They even let us play with the fire hose. Of course, they had to hold us because we didn't want to fly away. But I feel like somewhere along down the line, they stopped doing that. They took away so much. And since they took away so much, then the younger generation has no idea about what it could have been to actually feel cared about. Like, if I'm sitting on my porch and then I see a police officer on the corner and he's patrolling, I would honestly probably want the police officer to come up to me and be like, hey, how you doing? My name is so-and-so. I'll be patrolling this area. If you need anything, let me know. The people in school, the young children in school, I don't think it's the security that's the problem. I think it's just the communication, like Councilman was talking about earlier. The communication is still key to every relationship, right? So if we communicated more and got a better understanding on both sides and different ages, then we wouldn't have to feel like we're a threat, or we wouldn't have to feel like we shouldn't go to school because we're scared that this might happen, and that might happen.
Reverend Quincy, tell us about how we can get rid of that so that we don't retaliate in those violent ways.
First, before we do that, if you don't mind, I want to say thank you to Brother Armand. Armand, I want to make this very clear. Two things I want to make very clear. One is Armand came dressed like this tonight, not knowing that he would be on the panel. And he was called to step in on the panel, so he really had no prep. So I think he's done a really good job for having called in at the last minute. So thank you, especially for whom you're filling in. And then that's a whole other story. But this concept of protecting, Ms. Goldstein hit on one point. The absence of the father, the male figure in community. It's really, that's one piece, because typically we have been trained, if nothing else, to look to men for protection in some shape, form, or fashion. We are expected to be the ones to provide protection. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, is that the structure of what we've been taught, men being providers, men being protectors, has really kind of led to the absence of the male. Because a lot of men, I believe, they walk out of their lives of their family not because they don't care about their family, but because they feel incapable of providing for their families. And sometimes they feel like my family would be better off if I'm not there. And so as a result, we have this challenge. We started a group here called Band of Brothers, where we're trying to bring men from our community together. I'm convinced that one of the challenges we have in our community is that there is no place for an African American man to be real. We always have to be on guard. We always have to be right. We can't make a mistake. You know, if the councilman come in and make a statement that, and then, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, there's all of this heaviness that comes back. There's all this backlash. And so as a result, we kind of disengage because there's so much pressure. And I think that one of the things we have to do is we have to target rebuilding that population within our community, because if we don't rebuild that population will continue to skew. 68% of African American households are headed by single mothers. It's deplorable. It really is deplorable. And so there has to be some aggressive tactics taken and some strategies. One of the things I talk about is the fact that we have to be consistent. We have to be concerted. We have to make sure that we're doing things that actually will have an impact. And stop always reacting. We are reacting all the time. And it takes so much energy to react to a situation, so much more energy to react to a situation rather than to act to build something in the first place. It takes a lot less to build a house than it does to try to fix a house that's on a bad foundation. And so what happens is that we are reacting so much to bad foundations or to bad buildings that we're spending a lot of energy trying to fix problems instead of trying to spend a lot of energy trying to create. So working with our young men and teaching them how to be men in the first place helps to stabilize them as they go into these situations. Creating it within our environment policies. Our mom mentioned several programs that really no longer exist. But that's because when we disengage, right, then we're no longer involved in policies. We have to vote. We have to vote. I know I'm in the wrong place to talk about voting because I'm in Lee Harvard, Ward 1, which is the largest voting bloc in the country. But that has to go beyond here. We cannot be the only bloc that's expected and that will show up in every election. So we go back a few months. 2014, we had an election here, right? An easy election because we knew, number one, it was a midterm election, which meant that the number of people voting was going to decrease. Wouldn't it have been incredible if all of us would have showed up to the polls? It would have changed the game. Now, I don't care what you feel about our politics, it's not my discussion, but would not that have meant that Nina Turner would have been elected the Attorney General as opposed to the Secretary of State? I'm sorry, Attorney General. Lord, mercy. Maybe that's the next time. Anyway, she would have been elected Secretary of State, right? If the support for her would have showed up and pulled the lever. But as long as we sit back and we complain and we talk and we just kind of voice our opinions and don't pull the lever, we don't get the like-minded responses that we need. And that becomes part of the protection of our children. Now we can, okay, they're trying to tell me time. I'm sorry, y'all got me on the, all right. But we're talking about, when we talk about this concept of protecting our children, we do have to talk about the concept of getting involved in the areas that are most important. Voting is one of those areas. We talked about being on jury duty. Nobody wants to serve on jury duty. But then we're always offended when the jury or the grand jury comes back without an indictment, but we're at home watching it. We ought to be a part of the process, and that's how we protect our children. We allow these programs like DARE to stay in our community. We allow these programs that he was talking about with the fire department, because now we fund these programs and they can stay. And I'm going to pass it on because I'm talking too much.
Well, I know that we're out of time, but I did want to take a few moments. If anyone had any other questions, for instance, we have wonderful Councilman Commander Dion here, and there are so many topics that haven't even been discussed.
We still have PAL. It's just, like the pastor said, the funding is not necessarily there to make it as big as it once was to sponsor football teams and basketball teams and all that. But these programs do still exist. My wife is a police officer in the 5th District. She's a detective, a sergeant in charge of the detectives. And she's in training right now in a training which is called GREAT training. And that's an acronym for Gang Resistance, Education, and Training, where we go into the schools and we talk to kids about resisting some of the gang influences that exist in the school. So these programs still exist. They just exist on a smaller scale because, like you said, if you don't get out and vote, if you don't pass the levies, when the levies come onto the ballot, when that money is not there, then we have no choice but to cut back.
We'll take one more question. Is there one? I actually have a question. Somebody wrote on our index card, and this is what they asked. What can be done as the next step to progress toward the goal of helping to make people feel like their lives matter? Councilman, please take it.
I think that question is, I think it's very, very simple, right? I mean, it's not, I don't think it requires a whole lot of work or even for you to change a whole lot of your behavior. It's very simple. It's about that innate human connection. Like the gentleman asked about programming for youth activities. When you think about, we have John F. Kennedy High School that plays multiple different games, right? You have a horde of different youth activities, football programs. You have Little League Baseball getting ready to start up in the summer. But when you go up there and you see the activities, once a child gets past the age that you got to watch them, 9 or 10, you already see anybody up there watching their games. You go up to John F. Kennedy High School to a football game, right? The stadium seats 1,000 people. You barely have 100. And it's during the day, so these are nighttime football games. Little stuff like that for the community, right? For people in the streets just to get out, right? I know it might be cold during football season, but getting out and watching these young people and supporting them in their activities, if they're doing cheerleading, if they're doing other things like that. It changes the perception. One is you might get to see that child that you see walking down your street in a different light. They recognize you, you recognize them. It helps break down some of that disconnection. It also shows that the community supports them, right? It's all other kind of tangible things that come from that. One is when you have more people, it doesn't require a whole lot. Sometimes it may be good as an outing. Let's get a group of folks, let's go sit up at, it's a nice day, the weather's nice, let's go up and sit up at St. Henry's and watch a baseball game. It's activity, gets you out, but that little thing, that little innate connection makes a big difference, especially in young folks. It changes the mind. Now listen, we do care about you. It supports other programs like Eyes on, we got my eyes on you. It also breaks down some of that stuff. I mean, when you talk about how to feel safe in your community. My neighbors here, one of the things that I feel safe the most, when I moved in that house, I took down the fences, right? We had a lot of greenery that built up a barrier. I took all that down. She got, you know David. David's a teenager. He plays in the backyard, and sometimes he also plays in the backyard with his friends. That's my security, right? I can leave my back door open, leave my garage up, because my neighbor, this teenager, and you know how teenagers are. But that's the security. He can see the whole street. Ain't nobody gonna come in and kick in my back door while he out there playing basketball, right? When you got kids playing in the street, I know it pisses people off, right? You got the basketball hoop on the corner. But once you get to know those kids, you ain't got to worry about nobody going to your front door. You ain't got to worry about nobody breaking in your house. Little stuff like that helps you feel safer, especially, because most people, you may come across a ruthless person, but 99% of these young people, they're not dangerous, right? They may be misguided, they may do stupid stuff, they may do dangerous things, but they're not terrorists. You get to know them, they're not gonna mess with you, right? And and then just having that connection, getting to see them in different venues, they get to see you in different venues, and knowing that, listen, that we all matter, right? We live here. Like, you guys ain't going no place, and for the most part, most of these young people ain't going no place. So just figuring out how do you operate in this new environment, because it's like you said, it's about connection. They community. The way you were raised, the way you raise your children is different than the way they are being raised. But you can still make that human connection, and that sometimes is enough to make you feel comfortable and safe in your own community.
Thank you so much. We're not going to take any more questions, but we do want to remind you that this whole conversation was sparked by Reverend Quincy's book, Black Lives Matter. It's a great read, and I think it would benefit all of us to just keep this conversation going. Now this concludes our forum, so let's give our panelists a round of applause.